What happens when the greatest empire in history nearly dies? Rome, the empire that would rule the world for centuries. Imagine this. One man, one army, arrives at Rome's gates, surrounds it, slaughters its legions, destroys everything in his path. For 16 years, Rome lived in terror. Roman children cried at the mere mention of his name. Mothers scared their kids. If you don't sleep, Hannibal will fucking come for you. This man, Hannibal Barca, came from a civilization you've probably never heard of. Not Greece, not Persia, not Egypt. Carthage, an empire that was richer than Rome, more advanced than Rome, more powerful than Rome, an empire of merchants who became warriors, traders who became conquerors, an empire so dangerous that Rome decided it must be completely erased from existence. And here's the crazy part, they succeeded. Today, if you ask anyone about ancient empires, they'll say Rome, Greece, Egypt, Persia. But Carthage, most people have never heard of it. That's not an accident. That's by design. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage, they obliterated it, burned the city to the ground, killed or enslaved every person, salted the earth so nothing would grow again. Then they rewrote history, made themselves the heroes and Carthage the villain. But tonight, we're telling the real story. The story Rome didn't want you to know. Now, before we start, I know what you're thinking. Another history story? What does some ancient empire have to do with my life? Fair question. Let me tell you exactly why this matters. This is not just a bedtime history story. This is a masterclass in strategy, leadership, entrepreneurship, and survival. Think about it. Carthage started as a small trading post, a few merchants on a beach. Within centuries, they built a commercial empire that dominated the Mediterranean. They didn't have the biggest army, they didn't have the most land, but they had something more powerful: strategy. What you'll learn tonight. So tonight, over the next 2 hours, you're going to learn strategy. How a small trading nation became a superpower through smart alliances and innovative thinking. Leadership. How Hannibal, one of history's greatest generals, nearly destroyed Rome with inferior resources. Entrepreneurship. How Carthaginian merchants built trade networks that generated more wealth than military conquest. Competition. Why Rome saw Carthage as such a threat that they felt they had to erase it completely. Mindset. How to think like an underdog competing against giants. Failure. Why Carthage fell despite being smarter and richer, and what you can learn from their mistakes. This isn't just ancient history. These are timeless lessons that apply to business today, to leadership today, to your life today. Now let's get into it. Carthage, what was it? Where was it? When did it exist? Let me make this crystal clear, because we're starting from zero. Location, North Africa, in what is now Tunisia, specifically near the modern city of Tunis. Time period, founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers from the city of Tyre, modern-day Lebanon, destroyed by Rome in 146 BC. So we're talking about roughly 700 years of history, from 814 BC to 146 BC. Who were the Carthaginians? Originally, they were Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were the greatest sailors and traders of the ancient world. They came from the coast of modern Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. They sailed across the Mediterranean, founding trading posts everywhere. One of those trading posts was Carthage, and Carthage would grow to become greater than the mother city. What made Carthage special? Trade, innovation, strategy. While other civilizations focused on conquering land, Carthage focused on controlling trade routes. They didn't need to own the land if they controlled the sea. They traded in purple dye, worth more than gold, silver, Gold, ivory, tin, wine, olive oil, grain, exotic animals, slaves. They built ships faster and better than anyone else. They established colonies across the Mediterranean, Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, North Africa. By 300 BC, Carthage was one of the richest cities in the world. Wealthier than Rome, more sophisticated than Rome, more connected than Rome. And Rome hated them for it. Why did Rome hate Carthage? Jealousy, fear, competition, two rising powers, both wanting to dominate the Mediterranean. Only one could win. Part 1. The Phoenix Rises from Tyre. The Escape. The year was 814 BC. In the ancient Phoenician city of Tyre, a woman stood on a rooftop, watching the harbor. Her name was Alyssa, but history would remember her as Dido, the founder, the queen, the legend. She was royalty, daughter of the king. But tonight, she was a fugitive. Her brother Pygmalion had murdered her husband, not in battle, not with honor. He'd killed him in the temple, stabbed him at the altar while he prayed, just to steal his gold. Dido knew she was next, so she made a choice that would echo through 3,000 years. She would run, and she would take half the city with her. The greatest heist. Under the cover of darkness, Dido loaded ships, but not just with people, with treasure. Gold from the temples, silver from the merchant houses, the sacred stones of Baal Hammon, the god of Tyre, and most importantly, the people who made Tyre powerful. The shipbuilders, the navigators, the craftsmen who could turn copper and tin into bronze. Pygmalion discovered the plan too late. By dawn, Dido's fleet was already beyond the horizon. 80 ships, thousands of refugees, and enough wealth to build a new kingdom. The journey west. They sailed for weeks, past Cyprus, where the copper mines glowed red in the moonlight, past Crete, where ancient kings had once ruled the waves, through storms that shattered lesser vessels. Dido stood at the prow of the lead ship, salt spray in her face, watching the sun set over waters no Phoenician had ever claimed. She wasn't just running anymore. She was searching for a place where her brother's reach couldn't find her, a place where she could build something new, something that would make Tyre look like a fishing village. The sailors whispered she was mad, that they'd sail off the edge of the world, that the gods would punish them for leaving the homeland. But Dido had made a promise to herself. She would never bow to a murderer, even if it meant sailing into the unknown. The landing. They found it on the North African coast, a natural harbor shaped like a crescent moon, hills rising behind it, perfect for defense, fresh water springs, timber from inland forests, and something else. The local Berber tribes were willing to trade, not fight, trade. Dido went ashore with gifts, golden bracelets, purple dyed cloth, the famous Tyrian purple that only royalty could wear, polished mirrors that seemed like magic to people who'd only seen their reflections in still water. The Berber king, Iarbas, received her in his tent. He was intrigued by this foreign queen with her strange ships and stranger confidence. "I want to buy land," Dido said through an interpreter, "enough to build a city." Iarbas laughed. He'd heard of Phoenician traders, clever people who could sell sand to a desert dweller. He decided to test her. "You can have as much land," he said with a smile, "as you can cover with a single ox hide." The other Berber chiefs laughed. An ox hide? That would be enough for a small house. Maybe a warehouse, certainly not a city. But Dido didn't argue. She simply agreed. The deal of the century. What happened next became legend. Dido took the ox hide back to her ships. She called for her sharpest knives and her most patient craftsmen. And then she gave an order that seemed insane. Cut the hide into the thinnest possible strips, so thin you could almost see through them. Then tie those strips together, end to end, into one continuous rope. It took 3 days. When they finished, that single ox hide had become a leather cord over 2 miles long. Dido returned to Irbis. She laid out the cord in a massive semicircle, using the coastline as the fourth side. The enclosed area was enormous, enough for a city, walls, farmland, everything. Iarbas stared. He'd been outsmarted by a refugee queen, but a deal was a deal. The Berbers kept their word, and Dido had her land. Building Bursa. They called it Byrsa, the hide, in memory of that legendary bargain. But the city that rose there would become known by another name, Carthage, the new city. The Phoenicians built with purpose. They'd learned from generations of master builders in Tyre. They knew that a city wasn't just houses, it was a system. First came the walls, not the modest walls of a trading post. Real fortifications, stone blocks each weighing more than 3 men, fitted so precisely you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. 40 feet high, wide enough for 4 horses to ride abreast on top. Then the harbor. This was where Phoenician genius truly shone. They didn't build one harbor, they built 2. A rectangular merchant harbor for trade ships, protected, organized, efficient, and next to it, hidden behind a wall, a circular military harbor, the Kothon. Inside the Kothon, they constructed shipyards arranged in a perfect circle around a central island. Each shipyard could build or repair a warship. There were slots for 170 vessels, all hidden from enemy eyes, all protected from storms. From the central island, the harbor master could see every ship at once, could coordinate the launch of the entire fleet with simple flag signals. Rome would copy this design centuries later, but they would never improve it. The first generation. Dido ruled for 39 years. She never remarried, despite pressure from both her own people and the Berber king Iarbas, who wanted her as his wife. The story goes that when Iarbas threatened war if she didn't marry him, Dido built a funeral pyre. She told her people she was going to make a sacrifice to her dead husband's spirit. Then she climbed onto the pyre and ordered it lit. She chose death over dishonor, over submission, over breaking the vow she'd made to her murdered husband. But before she died, she'd done something extraordinary. She'd planted a seed, a city, a culture, a new civilization that would grow beyond anything even she could imagine. Because Carthage wasn't just about trade, it was about an idea. The idea that you didn't need kings and empires to be powerful. That merchants and sailors and craftsmen, citizens, could build something greater than any throne. That intelligence mattered more than armies. That wealth came from exchange, not conquest. For the next few centuries, that idea would thrive. Part 2. The Merchant Empire. The Trade Network. By 500 BC, Carthage controlled the western Mediterranean, not through conquest, through commerce. Their ships sailed routes no one else dared, down the African coast, trading for gold and ivory and exotic animals, north to the British Isles, where tin mines produced the metal needed for bronze, west through the Pillars of Hercules, what we call Gibraltar, into the Atlantic. Some historians believe Carthaginian explorers reached the Azores, possibly even the coast of Brazil, 2,000 years before Columbus. They kept these routes secret. When foreign ships tried to follow Carthaginian vessels, the Carthaginian captains would deliberately run aground on rocks or shoals, sacrificing their own ships to protect the knowledge of the routes. The Carthaginian government would then reimburse the captain for the lost ship and cargo. The cost of the secret was worth more than any individual voyage. That's strategic thinking. That's valuing information as the ultimate asset. The colonies. Carthage founded daughter cities across the Mediterranean, each one carefully placed, each one serving a purpose in the grand network. In Sicily, the breadbasket island that everyone wanted, they established ports on the western side. They didn't try to conquer the whole island, just controlled enough to dominate the grain trade. In Sardinia, they mined silver. In Iberia, modern Spain, they extracted incredible wealth. Gold, silver, copper. The mines of Iberia made Carthage rich beyond measure. In North Africa itself, they expanded carefully, making deals with Berber tribes, offering protection, trade opportunities, technology. Many Berbers became Carthaginian allies, not subjects. This was the Carthaginian way. Why fight when you can negotiate? Why conquer when you can partner? But don't mistake this for weakness. Carthage had teeth. The Sacred Band. The elite military unit of Carthage was called the Sacred Band. 2,500 men, all citizens, all trained from childhood in warfare. They wore bronze armor polished to mirror brightness, white tunics underneath, purple cloaks over their shoulders, the colors of Carthage. Their shields bore the symbol of Tanit, the patron goddess, a triangle topped with a circle and a horizontal bar. These weren't conscripts or hired swords. These were professionals who fought for their city, for their families, for the merchant ships that brought prosperity, for the system that had made them wealthy. But here's the thing about a merchant empire. Merchants don't want to fight. They want to trade. So Carthage did something controversial, something that would later be used against them. They hired mercenaries, Numidian cavalry from the North African plains, the finest horsemen in the world, who could shoot arrows at full gallop and hit a target the size of a man's head. Balearic slingers from the islands, who could kill with a lead bullet at 200 paces, Iberian infantry with their deadly falcata swords. Gallic warriors 7 feet tall with iron longswords. The Carthaginian generals would blend these different troops into combined arms forces that were devastating. Infantry to hold the line, cavalry to flank and pursue, slingers and archers to soften enemy formations, war elephants to break their morale. It worked. For centuries it worked. The government. Unlike Rome with its kings and later its senators, Carthage was run by merchants. The Council of Elders, 104 wealthy families who'd proven their worth through trade and administration. 2 Sophites, judges, elected annually to handle day-to-day governance. The assembly of citizens who could vote on major decisions, especially declarations of war. It was a republic. In some ways, more democratic than Rome. But it had a weakness. A fatal weakness that wouldn't become clear for centuries. The wealthy families competed, they maneuvered, they played politics, and sometimes, often, they let those politics interfere with winning. The first storm clouds. By 280 BC, Carthage was at its peak. The richest city in the Mediterranean, the most powerful navy, colonies from Libya to Spain. But there was a problem, a growing problem. On the Italian peninsula, a city-state was expanding, conquering its neighbors, building roads and legions and ambitions. Rome, the two powers had signed treaties. respected each other's spheres of influence. Carthage dominated the sea, Rome the land. It seemed stable, but then something happened, something that would ignite a conflict lasting over a century. 3 wars, hundreds of thousands dead, and ultimately the complete destruction of one civilization. It started with a small group of mercenaries in a city on Sicily, a city called Messina, and the decision that followed would change the world forever. Part 3. The First Punic War. The Mamertines. They called themselves the Mamertines, sons of Mars. But everyone else called them what they really were: bandits. These were Italian mercenaries who'd been hired by the tyrant of Syracuse to fight his wars. When he died, they found themselves unemployed, so they did what unemployed mercenaries often do. They stole a city. Messana sat at the northeastern tip of Sicily, right across the strait from Italy. The Mamertines murdered the men of the city, took their wives, and made Messana their base for raiding. For years, they terrorized northeastern Sicily. Neither Carthage nor Syracuse could dislodge them, until Syracuse finally had enough. King Hiero II of Syracuse besieged Messana. The Mamertines were trapped, so they did something desperate. They asked for help. They sent messages to both Carthage and Rome, and both powers faced the same dilemma. The decision. In Carthage, the Council of Elders debated. Messana was a nest of criminals, but it also controlled the strait between Sicily and Italy. If Syracuse took it, they'd control all of eastern Sicily. The Carthaginians sent a garrison. They saved the Mamertines temporarily. In Rome, the Senate debated too. They had a treaty with Carthage. Intervening in Sicily would break it, but if Carthage controlled the strait, they could threaten the Italian coast. The Roman People's Assembly voted to help the Mamertines. Rome sent an army across the strait. The First Punic War had begun, and neither side had any idea it would last 23 years. Carthage's mistake. The Carthaginian commander in Messana made a catastrophic error. When he saw the Roman army approaching, he panicked. He abandoned the city, withdrew his garrison, sailed away without a fight. The Carthaginian government was furious. They crucified him, the traditional Carthaginian punishment for failure, but the damage was done. Rome controlled Messana. They had a foothold in Sicily, and they had no intention of leaving. The war that followed would be fought mostly at sea, which should have been Carthage's element, their strength, their domain. But Rome surprised everyone. The Corvus. Romans were land fighters. Their navy was pitiful compared to Carthage. Carthaginian quinqueremes, warships with 5 banks of oars, were faster, more maneuverable, crewed by sailors who'd been at sea since childhood. In a traditional naval battle, Carthage would win every time. So Rome changed the rules. They invented a device called the Corvus, the Raven, a boarding bridge mounted on the front of their ships. When a Roman vessel got close to an enemy, they dropped the Corvus. It had a heavy spike on the end that pierced the enemy deck. Suddenly, naval battles became land battles. Roman marines poured across the bridge, and on a deck, face to face, shield to shield, the Roman legionaries were unstoppable. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, Rome destroyed 50 Carthaginian ships. The Carthaginians were shocked. At Ecnomus in 256 BC, Rome won the largest naval battle in ancient history. 300,000 men, nearly 700 ships. Rome crushed the Carthaginian fleet. For the first time in centuries, Carthage did not control the sea. Regulus in Africa. Emboldened, Rome did something audacious. They invaded North Africa itself, landed an army on Carthaginian soil. The Roman general was Marcus Atilius Regulus, brave, aggressive, confident to the point of arrogance. He defeated the Carthaginian army outside the walls of Carthage. The city seemed ready to fall. Carthage sent ambassadors to negotiate peace. Regulus demanded terms so harsh: dismantle the navy, abandon Sicily, pay massive tribute, that the Carthaginians decided they'd rather die than accept. Sometimes push someone too hard and they stop negotiating, they start fighting. The Spartan. Carthage hired a military advisor, a Spartan named Xanthippus, not because Carthage lacked generals, but because they needed someone who understood Roman tactics. Xanthippus looked at the situation. The Carthaginian army outnumbered the Romans. The Carthaginians had cavalry and elephants, but they'd been losing because they fought on broken ground where their advantages didn't matter. So Xanthippus chose a battlefield, a flat plain near Tunis, perfect for cavalry, perfect for elephants. The battle was a massacre. The elephants broke the Roman lines. The cavalry surrounded them. 500 Romans escaped. Regulus was captured. Rome's invasion of Africa was over. The grinding war. The war dragged on, year after year, battle after battle, both sides exhausted, both sides bleeding. Rome lost entire fleets to storms, 200 ships destroyed in a single tempest off Sicily, another 150 off Sardinia. The Mediterranean was cruel to the overconfident. Carthage held Sicily's western cities, but the cost was staggering. Mercenary armies were expensive, and when Carthage couldn't pay, mercenaries rebelled. By 241 BC, both powers were exhausted, financially drained, losing the will to continue. Then came the Aegates Islands. One final naval battle off western Sicily. The Roman fleet, rebuilt one more time with borrowed money, caught the Carthaginian supply fleet. Rome sank 50 ships, captured 70 more. 10,000 Carthaginians died. Carthage had no money left to build another fleet, no will to continue. They sued for peace. The treaty. Rome's terms were harsh, but not impossible. Carthage would abandon Sicily, pay an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years, release all Roman prisoners without ransom. Carthage agreed. After 23 years, the First Punic War was over. Rome controlled Sicily, its first overseas province. Carthage still had its African territories, its Spanish colonies, its trade networks. Both powers survived, both could rebuild, but the peace wouldn't last, because Rome learned something dangerous. They learned they could beat Carthage, and Carthage learned something even more dangerous. They learned they needed a different kind of general. Not a merchant politician who commanded armies on the side. A real military genius. Someone who lived for war, who breathed strategy, who could turn Rome's strength into its weakness. They found him in Spain, a young man raised in military camps, trained by his father who'd hated Rome with every breath. His name was Hannibal Barca, and he would bring Rome to its knees. Part 4. Between Wars. The Mercenary Revolt. Peace brought a new nightmare. Carthage had 20,000 mercenaries in Sicily. Now that the war was over, they needed to be paid and discharged. The problem: Carthage was broke. The mercenaries sailed to North Africa expecting their wages. Instead, Carthage tried to negotiate, reduce the payment, spread it over time. Standard tactics when dealing with creditors. But mercenaries aren't creditors. They're armed, trained, Angry men who've been promised payment for risking their lives. The mercenaries revolted, and they weren't alone. They convinced Berber tribes to join them, Libyan cities that resented Carthaginian control. Soon, Carthage faced an army of 70,000 rebels surrounding the city. They called it the Truceless War. No prisoners, no mercy, no negotiation. Hamilcar Barca. One general saved Carthage, Hamilcar Barca, lightning bolt. He'd commanded Carthaginian forces in Sicily during the final years of the First Punic War. He'd never lost a battle, never been defeated. He'd been betrayed by politicians who made peace while he was winning. Hamilcar hated Rome, hated them with a cold, focused fury. But first, he had to save his city. For 3 years, he fought the mercenaries. Not with massive armies, Carthage couldn't afford them. With cunning, ambushes, night attacks, turning enemy tribes against each other, offering surrender to those who'd defect. He crucified the mercenary leaders who refused to yield, massacred those who'd committed atrocities, destroyed the rebellion completely. When it was over, Hamilcar was Carthage's hero, and he had plans. Spain. Carthage needed money to pay Rome's indemnity, needed resources to rebuild. Spain had both. Hamilcar took an army to Iberia, not to conquer, to create. He made alliances with Iberian tribes, built new cities, developed the silver mines. Most importantly, he trained an army, not mercenaries who fought for pay, an army that fought for him. He brought his family, his sons. He had them swear oaths of eternal hatred toward Rome. Standing before altars, 9-year-old Hannibal placed his hand on the sacrifice and swore he would never be Rome's friend. That oath would echo through history. Rome's treachery. While Carthage rebuilt in Spain, Rome committed an act of pure opportunism. During the mercenary revolt, when Carthage was fighting for survival, Sardinia had rebelled. The Sardinian garrison asked Rome for help. After the revolt ended, when Carthage sent forces to reclaim Sardinia, Rome declared that this was an act of aggression. They threatened war unless Carthage abandoned Sardinia. Carthage was in no position to fight. They gave up Sardinia and paid an additional 1,200 talents. It was theft, pure and simple, a violation of the treaty, an act of bad faith. Hamilcar never forgot. His family never forgot. The new Carthage. In Spain, Hamilcar built a new capital. Carthago, Nova, New Carthage. A planned city with a magnificent harbor. Silver from the mines flowed through its markets. Hamilcar was creating an empire, not the old Carthaginian empire of trade networks and treaties. A new empire built on military strength and personal loyalty. When Hamilcar drowned crossing a river in 229 BC, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair took command. He continued the expansion, continued the building. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army acclaimed a new commander. They didn't wait for Carthage's approval. They chose. They chose Hamilcar's eldest son, 26 years old. Brilliant, charismatic, already a veteran of Spanish campaigns. Hannibal Barca, the man who would become Rome's greatest nightmare. Part 5. Hannibal. The man. Imagine a general who could see the battlefield like a chess master sees the board. 3 moves ahead, 5 moves, 10. Hannibal didn't just plan battles, he planned campaigns. He understood logistics, psychology, politics, weather, terrain. He could read his enemies' fears and exploit them, read his own men's limits and push past them. He spoke multiple languages, dressed like his soldiers, ate the same food, slept in the same camps. The men loved him, but he was also calculating, ruthless when necessary, capable of extraordinary cruelty when it served his purpose. Rome would learn to fear that combination. Intelligence and determination. Vision and violence. Saguntum. There was a city in Spain called Saguntum, south of the Ebro River, the boundary Rome and Carthage had agreed on, technically in Carthage's sphere. But Saguntum had made an alliance with Rome. They attacked Carthaginian allies. When Hannibal warned them to stop, they refused. So Hannibal laid siege. For 8 months, Rome sent ambassadors, warned Hannibal that attacking Saguntum would mean war. Hannibal didn't blink. He took the city, enslaved the survivors, divided the plunder among his troops. Rome sent ambassadors to Carthage, demanded that Carthage hand over Hannibal. The Carthaginian council refused. They'd been humiliated after the First Punic War, forced to pay tribute, had Sardinia stolen. This time, they would stand firm. The Roman ambassador Quintus Fabius held out his toga. In these folds, I carry peace and war. Choose which you wish. The Carthaginian Suffete replied, You choose. We accept either. Fabius let the toga drop. Then we give you war. The Second Punic War had begun. The plan. Everyone expected Hannibal to defend Spain, wait for the Roman legions to arrive, fight on familiar ground. Hannibal had a different idea. A crazy idea. He would invade Italy, march an army over the Alps, bring the war to Rome's doorstep. His advisors thought he was insane. The Alps were impossible to cross with an army. No one had ever done it. But Hannibal had calculated. Rome's strength was its allies, the Italian tribes and cities that provided soldiers, supplies, support. If Hannibal could break those alliances, Rome would be alone. And alone, Rome could be beaten. The March. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal's army left Spain, 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. They crossed the Pyrenees, fought through hostile Gallic tribes in southern France, reached the Rhone River. The Roman consul Publius Scipio had sailed with an army to intercept Hannibal in Spain. When he learned Hannibal was already in France, heading for the Alps, Scipio couldn't believe it. He sent his army to Spain under his brother's command. He himself sailed back to Italy to prepare defenses. Meanwhile, Hannibal stood at the foot of the Alps. Autumn was coming. Snow already capped the peaks. The local tribes said crossing was impossible. Hannibal looked at his men. He'd brought them this far. Now came the hard part. They started climbing. The Alps. 15 days. That's how long it took to cross the Alps. 15 days of hell. The paths were narrow, barely wide enough for the elephants. One wrong step meant a 1,000-foot fall. Gallic tribes attacked from above, rolled boulders down on the column, shot arrows and spears. Hannibal's rearguard fought constant skirmishes. The cold was worse than the fighting. Men who'd trained under the Spanish sun had never felt cold like this. Soldiers wrapped themselves in whatever they could find. Some froze in their sleep. The elephants suffered most. Designed for African heat, now trudging through snow. Avalanches buried entire sections of the column. Men and animals together, entombed in ice. On the 9th day, they reached the summit. Hannibal had the army stop, rest, look. To the north, the peaks they'd crossed. To the south, spread below like a garden, the plains of northern Italy, Rome's heartland. Hannibal pointed. That, he told his men, is where we'll find glory. The descent. Going down was worse. The path had been destroyed by a rock slide. Hannibal's engineers had to rebuild it. They heated boulders with fires, then poured vinegar on them. The acid and temperature change fractured the rock. Then they cleared the debris by hand. It took 3 days to clear enough path for the army to continue. When they finally reached the Italian plains, Hannibal counted his forces: 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, a few elephants still alive. He'd lost more than half his army crossing the Alps, but he was in Italy, behind Rome's defenses, in a position no Roman general had thought possible. And waiting for him were the Gauls of northern Italy, tribes that hated Rome, tribes eager for revenge against Roman conquest. They flocked to Hannibal's banner, thousands of warriors, thousands more coming. Within weeks, Hannibal's army was strong again. Rome sent the consul Publius Scipio, the same one who'd tried to intercept Hannibal in France, to stop him. At the Trebia River, Hannibal laid a trap. Trebia. It was December, cold, snowing. Hannibal hid cavalry in ravines on both flanks. Then he sent light troops to provoke the Romans. Skirmish, retreat, draw them out. The Roman consul Sempronius was eager for battle, eager to win. He ordered his 40,000 men to cross the river. They waded through icy water chest deep, came out on the other side, freezing, exhausted. Hannibal's army was warm, fresh, ready. The battle began. The Roman legions pushed forward. Hannibal's center gave ground, planned retreat, drawing the Romans deeper. Then the hidden cavalry struck, both flanks simultaneously. The Roman army was surrounded, cut to pieces. 20,000 Romans died, 10,000 captured. Sempronius escaped with barely 10,000 men. Rome's first army sent against Hannibal was destroyed, and it was only the beginning. Lake Trasimene. Rome sent new consuls, new armies. One consul, Gaius Flaminius, marched to intercept Hannibal in central Italy. Hannibal was ready. He found a perfect killing ground, Lake Trasimene. The road ran between the lake and hills covered in trees. Hannibal hid his entire army in those hills. Then he waited. Early morning, FOG, rolling off the lake. The Roman column marched along the road, 40,000 men in a line 3 miles long. They couldn't see anything, couldn't see the hills, couldn't see their own vanguard. When the entire column was in the trap, Hannibal's trumpets sounded. 25,000 men poured down from the hills, hit the Romans from the side. No time to form ranks, no time to organize. It was slaughter. 15,000 Romans died in 3 hours. Flaminius was killed, stabbed by a Gallic warrior who'd recognized his armor. The rest were driven into the lake. Hannibal lost 1,500 men. Rome lost an entire army. Again, all of Italy was in panic. Fabius Maximus. Rome made Quintus Fabius Maximus dictator. Emergency powers to save the Republic. Fabius was old, experienced, careful. He looked at Hannibal's victories and understood. In open battle, Hannibal was unbeatable, so Fabius refused to fight. He shadowed Hannibal's army, harassed stragglers, cut supply lines, avoided battle, waiting for Hannibal to make a mistake. The Romans called him the delayer. Some meant it as an insult, but Fabius knew something crucial. Hannibal's army lived off the land, lived off plunder. If Fabius could deny them supplies, deny them a decisive battle, eventually they'd have to leave. It was working, slowly, painfully, but working. Then Fabius's term ended. New consuls took command. Young men, aggressive men, men who wanted glory, who wanted to be the ones who defeated Hannibal. Rome gave them the largest army it had ever assembled, 86,000 men, 8 legions, and sent them to fight Hannibal at a place called Cannae. Part 6. Cannae. The setup. August 2nd, 216 BC, the plains near Cannae in southeastern Italy. Dawn breaking over the largest Roman army ever assembled, 86,000 men, cavalry on the wings, heavy infantry in the center. The consuls, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus commanding. Across the field, Hannibal watched. 50,000 men, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. Any normal general would retreat. But Hannibal wasn't normal, and he'd been planning this battle for years. He arranged his infantry in a crescent shape, the center pushed forward, the flanks held back, like a bow drawn tight. His brother Mago commanded the center. Gauls and Spaniards who'd fight fiercely, but would give ground under pressure. On the flanks, African veterans in captured Roman armor. His best troops, the cavalry, he split. Hasdrubal commanded the heavy cavalry on the left, facing the Roman cavalry. The Numidians on the right, facing the Roman allied cavalry. Everything depended on timing, on each part of his army doing exactly what he needed, at exactly the right moment. The trap closes. The Romans attacked. 86,000 men moving as one mass. The legions confident. They outnumbered the enemy. They had Rome's strength behind them. The Roman infantry smashed into Hannibal's center. The Gauls and Spaniards fought hard, but slowly, step by step, they gave ground. The crescent began to bend, inward, deeper, deeper. The Romans pushed harder. They thought they were winning. They pressed forward, eager to break through, eager to reach Hannibal himself. The Roman formation compressed, tightened. The men in the back pushed the men in front. The perfect Roman lines became a crowd. Swords became useless in the press. Men couldn't swing, couldn't move. They were packed so tight they could barely breathe. And still they pushed forward, into the trap. The hammer falls. On the flanks, Hasdrubal's cavalry charged. They were heavier, better armored than the Roman cavalry. They crushed them, drove them from the field. Then Hasdrubal did something brilliant. Instead of pursuing the fleeing Romans, he rode behind the Roman infantry line, crossed the entire battlefield, and hit the Roman allied cavalry from behind. They broke. RAN. Now Hasdrubal's cavalry were free. The entire Carthaginian cavalry and the Roman infantry had their backs exposed. At that moment, Hannibal gave the signal. The African veterans on the flanks, his best troops who'd been waiting, turned inward. They hit the Roman flanks. The Romans were surrounded, completely surrounded. 86,000 men trapped in a killing box. The slaughter. What happened next was the worst military disaster in Roman history, possibly in all of ancient history. The Romans couldn't fight, couldn't retreat, couldn't even fall when they were killed. The press of bodies held them upright. Hannibal's men methodically butchered them, stabbing, cutting, killing for hours. The consul Paulus died fighting, died with his men, honorably. The other consul, Varro, escaped, rode away while his army was being destroyed. By sunset, 70,000 Romans lay dead, 10,000 captured. The greatest army Rome had ever fielded was annihilated. Hannibal lost 6,000 men, 6,000 against 70,000. It wasn't a battle, it was a masterpiece. A work of military genius that would be studied for 2,000 years. Napoleon studied Cannae, so did Patton, Rommel. Every military mind that followed tried to understand how Hannibal had done the impossible. After Cannae, Hannibal's cavalry commander, Hannibal, rode to him after the battle. "Lord, you know how to win a victory, but you don't know how to use one. If you march on Rome now, in 5 days, you'll dine in the capital." Hannibal refused. Rome's walls were strong. His army was exhausted. He had no siege equipment. Hannibal rode away shaking his head. Later, historians would argue, Should Hannibal have marched on Rome? Could he have taken the city? We'll never know, because Hannibal made a different choice. He would break Rome's alliances, city by city, tribe by tribe, until Rome stood alone, and then Rome would fall. The defections. After Cannae, southern Italy rebelled. Cities opened their gates to Hannibal. Tribes that Rome had conquered saw their chance. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, joined Hannibal. Massive granaries, workshops, a symbol of Rome's failure. Syracuse in Sicily turned against Rome. The brilliant engineer Archimedes built war machines to defend the city. Cranes that could pluck ships from the water. Mirrors that focused sunlight to burn sails. Philip V of Macedon, seeing Rome weak, made an alliance with Hannibal, threatened to invade Italy from the east. Rome should have been finished, but Rome did something extraordinary, something that would define them as a people, as a civilization. They refused to quit. Part 7. Rome's response. The refusal. After Cannae, Carthage sent ambassadors to negotiate. Hannibal sent word through southern Italian cities. Peace, reasonable terms. Rome could keep most of its territory. Just acknowledge Carthage's supremacy. The Roman Senate refused, wouldn't even discuss terms. They declared a national emergency. Every man between 17 and 60 was drafted. Slaves were freed and armed. They scraped together legions from nothing. The Senate decreed that no one would speak of defeat. No mourning in public. No black clothing. Romans would act as if they'd won, as if Cannae had never happened. It was psychological warfare against themselves, forcing confidence, forcing belief, and somehow it worked. Fabius again. Fabius Maximus, the old general who'd avoided battle, was given command again. His strategy was simple: delay, harass, contain. Don't fight Hannibal directly, just prevent him from winning. Retake the cities that had defected, cut his supply lines, make every day in Italy cost him. It was frustrating, inglorious, effective. Hannibal controlled southern Italy, but he couldn't break Rome. The city itself remained defiant. The northern territories stayed loyal. Meanwhile, Rome's other legions were fighting elsewhere, in Spain, where Hannibal's brothers commanded Carthaginian forces, in Sicily, besieging Syracuse, in Sardinia, in Africa itself, raiding the Carthaginian coast. Rome was fighting on 5 fronts simultaneously, bleeding from 1,000 cuts, but not breaking. The younger Scipio. In Spain, Rome's generals were winning. Slowly, painfully. They pushed back the Carthaginian armies, captured silver mines, turned Spanish tribes against Carthage. Then disaster. Both Roman commanders were killed in battle in 211 BC. The Spanish legions were leaderless. Rome sent a new commander, a young man, 25 years old, unproven. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, son of the consul who'd first faced Hannibal, nephew of the general killed in Spain. Everyone thought Rome was desperate to send such a young commander. They thought he'd chosen Spain because he'd have no competition, no older generals to overshadow him. They were wrong. Scipio chose Spain because he'd been studying Hannibal, learning from him, understanding his tactics, and Scipio had decided he could beat Hannibal at his own game. Carthago Nova. Scipio looked at the strategic situation in Spain. 3 Carthaginian armies, scattered across the peninsula, the headquarters at Carthago Nova, New Carthage, Hannibal's father's city. Carthago Nova held the Spanish hostages, nobles' children who guaranteed their tribe's loyalty. It held the treasury, silver and gold. It held the workshops where weapons and ships were made. Take Carthago Nova, and Spain would fall. The problem? Carthago Nova had walls 30 feet high, a garrison, a fleet in the harbor. It was impregnable. Scipio attacked anyway. He marched his army 500 miles in 7 days. The Carthaginian armies couldn't respond. They were too far away. Scipio studied the defenses, asked local fishermen about the harbor, learned something crucial. At low tide, the lagoon on the north side became shallow, waist-deep. He attacked from 2 directions, the main assault at the gates, drawing defenders there. Meanwhile, 500 picked men with ladders waded across the lagoon at low tide. They climbed the undefended northern wall, opened the gates from inside. Carthago Nova fell in one day. Scipio captured the hostages, the treasury, the workshops, everything. Winning hearts. Here's where Scipio showed his genius, not just as a general, as a leader. He gathered the Spanish hostages, young nobles, children, some of them, terrified of what the Romans would do to them. Scipio set them free. All of them, sent them home to their tribes with gifts. He told the Spanish chiefs, Rome doesn't need hostages. Rome needs friends. One by one, the Spanish tribes switched sides, not because Rome forced them, because Scipio had shown them respect. The Carthaginian armies in Spain found themselves alone, surrounded by enemies. Within 2 years, Scipio had conquered all of Spain. The silver mines, Carthage's economic lifeline, were in Roman hands. The Carthaginian cause was bleeding gold. Stalemate in Italy. Meanwhile, Hannibal remained in southern Italy, undefeated in battle, but unable to win the war. For 13 years, he'd been in Italy. 13 years of fighting. His army was aging, veterans dying of disease, wounds, old age. Replacements came from Africa, but never enough. Rome slowly retook the rebellious cities. Capua fell in 211 BC. The Romans were brutal, executed the city leaders, sold thousands into slavery. A message to any city thinking of joining Hannibal. Syracuse fell the same year. Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier, run through while he was drawing geometric diagrams in the sand. "Don't disturb my circles," were reportedly his last words. Hannibal tried to save Syracuse, marched his army to Rome itself, camped outside the walls, hoping Rome would panic. Recall the legions besieging Syracuse. Rome didn't panic. They held an auction selling the land where Hannibal was camped. It sold at full price. A statement, "We don't believe you can take our city." Hannibal marched away. He couldn't besiege Rome, couldn't break through the walls. For the first time, Hannibal realized he might not win. Hasdrubal's March. In 207 BC, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal tried to help. He left Spain with a fresh army, crossed the Alps, using Hannibal's route, entered northern Italy. If Hasdrubal could unite with Hannibal, they'd have 60,000 men, enough to finish Rome. But Rome intercepted Hasdrubal's messenger, learned the plan, sent an army north to stop Hasdrubal before he could reach his brother. At the Metaurus River, the Romans caught Hasdrubal, destroyed his army, killed him. They cut off Hasdrubal's head, threw it into Hannibal's camp. Hannibal looked at his brother's head. For the first time, witnesses said they saw Hannibal weep. He knew then the war was lost. Part 8. Scipio in Africa. The invasion. In 204 BC, Scipio did what no Roman general had done successfully since Regulus 50 years earlier. He invaded Africa, landed near Carthage with 25,000 men. Scipio was 31 years old, Rome's greatest hope. Carthage panicked. They recalled Hannibal from Italy. After 16 years, Hannibal left the country he'd terrorized and bled, left knowing he'd never accomplished his mission. But Hannibal wasn't finished. He still had an army, still had his genius, and now he was fighting on home ground, defending his own city. One final battle would decide everything. Preparing for Zama. Scipio and Hannibal both prepared, both studied each other. Scipio had learned from Hannibal, learned the importance of cavalry, formed an alliance with the Numidian king Massinissa, bringing the finest cavalry in the world to Rome's side. Hannibal had 80 war elephants. He knew Scipio's infantry was strong, so he'd use the elephants to break them. Then his infantry would finish them. Before the battle, the two generals met alone, face to face, the two greatest military minds of their generation. They talked about peace, about terms, about the future. Hannibal offered Carthage would give up all overseas territories, pay an indemnity, become Rome's junior partner. Scipio's terms were harsher because he knew he could win. The meeting ended. Both men returned to their armies, both knowing that tomorrow one of them would be destroyed. The Battle of Zama. 202 BC, the plains near Zama in North Africa. Two armies, two legends. Hannibal released his elephants, 80 massive beasts charging. The ground shook. The noise was terrifying. But Scipio had prepared. He'd left gaps in his formation. The Roman trumpets blared, loud, sudden, sharp. The elephants panicked. Some ran through the gaps. Others turned back, trampling Hannibal's own cavalry. Scipio's Numidian cavalry, under Massinissa, destroyed Hannibal's cavalry on both flanks, just like Hannibal had done to Rome at Cannae. Then the infantry clashed, shield to shield, sword to sword, veterans of 16 years of war, Romans who'd survived Hannibal's terror, Carthaginians who'd never lost with Hannibal commanding. The lines held. Neither side could break the other. Then Massinissa's cavalry returned. They'd chased Hannibal's cavalry from the field. Now they hit Hannibal's infantry from behind, surrounded, just like Cannae. But this time, the Romans were the hammer. Defeat. 20,000 Carthaginians died. 20,000. Hannibal escaped with a few thousand men. For the first time in his career, Hannibal had been defeated, beaten by a man who'd learned everything from studying him. Carthage sued for peace, begged for it. Rome's terms were brutal. Carthage would disarm, surrender all but 10 warships, pay 10,000 talents over 50 years, never make war without Rome's permission. Carthage accepted. What choice did they have? Hannibal himself negotiated, convinced the Carthaginian Senate to accept. He told them, "We fought. We lost. Now we must survive." Hannibal's final years. Hannibal became Suffet, chief magistrate of Carthage. He tried to rebuild, reformed the government, rooted out corruption, made Carthage prosper again. But Rome didn't trust him. They demanded Carthage hand him over. Exile or death. Hannibal fled, went to Syria, advised King Antiochus in his war against Rome. Rome won that war too. Hannibal fled to Bithynia, to Crete, always running, always one step ahead of Roman agents. Finally, in 183 BC, surrounded in a Bithynian fortress, Hannibal took poison. He was 64 years old. His last words, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long felt, since they think it too long to wait for an old man's death." Even in death he had dignity. Even in defeat he had pride. Rome's greatest enemy was gone. Part 9. The Resurrection. 50 years later, After the Second Punic War, Carthage paid its debts, followed Rome's rules, became a model of compliance, and they prospered. Trade returned. The farms of North Africa produced grain. The workshops made goods. Carthage grew rich again. By 150 BC, Carthage had paid off its debt to Rome. 50 years of payments. Done. They were free, legally. Technically, they could rebuild their navy, could defend themselves, could be independent. But in Rome, there was a senator named Marcus Porcius Cato. Cato the Elder, a war hero, a hardliner. Cato had visited Carthage on a diplomatic mission. He'd seen the wealth, the bustling markets, the reconstruction, and it terrified him. Delenda est. Cato began ending every speech in the Senate, every speech, no matter the topic, with the same phrase: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Speech about road construction? And furthermore, I think Carthage must be destroyed. Speech about grain prices? And furthermore, I think Carthage must be destroyed. He'd hold up figs from Carthage, fresh, plump, beautiful. These were picked 3 days ago in Africa. That's how close Carthage is. That's how dangerous they remain. It was propaganda, fear-mongering, but it worked. Rome looked for an excuse, a reason to finish what they'd started. The trap. There was a Numidian king named Massinissa, the same one who'd helped Scipio defeat Hannibal, Rome's loyal ally. Massinissa began raiding Carthaginian territory, taking land, attacking villages, provoking. Carthage appealed to Rome. Rome ignored them, or delayed, sent commissions that accomplished nothing. Finally, after 50 border violations, Carthage raised an army, defended themselves. That's what Rome was waiting for. Rome declared that Carthage had violated the treaty, had raised an army without Roman permission. This was an act of war. The ultimatum. Rome sent an army to Africa, 80,000 men. Carthage sent ambassadors, Pleaded. Rome said, "Give us 300 hostages, the children of your noblest families." Carthage complied. Hundreds of children sent to Roman camps. Then Rome said, "Surrender all your weapons, every sword, every spear, every shield." Carthage complied, handed over 200,000 weapons, enough to arm the entire city. Then the Roman consul gave the final demand: abandon your city. Abandon Carthage. Move your people at least 10 miles inland. You may build a new city there, but Carthage itself must be destroyed. The Carthaginian ambassadors were speechless. Abandon the city? Abandon 800 years of history? The temples, the harbors, the graves of their ancestors? They returned to Carthage, delivered the message, and Carthage made its choice. Part 10. The Final Stand. The decision. The Carthaginian Senate met. The people crowded into the forum, rich and poor, old and young, all listening. They'd given hostages, given weapons, given everything, and Rome still wanted to erase them from existence, erase their city, their history, their name. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Better to die free than live as Roman slaves." The crowd roared, agreement, defiance. Carthage would fight with bare hands if necessary. They would not abandon their city. Impossible preparations. The Carthaginians had no weapons, no time, an army approaching. What they did next showed the resilience of a people pushed to the edge. Every man, woman, and child in the city went to work. The workshops ran day and night, forges glowing. They tore down temples for metal, melted bronze statues. The wealthy donated their jewelry. Women cut their hair, donated it to make bowstrings for siege weapons. In 60 days, they made 8,000 shields, 18,000 swords, 30,000 spears, countless arrows and javelins. They built defensive walls inside the existing walls, fallback positions, barricades in every street, and they armed everyone, old men, teenagers, former slaves, anyone who could hold a weapon. When the Roman army arrived, they expected a quick siege, a city without weapons, without hope. Instead, they found a fortress, a city ready to fight to the last person. 3 years. The siege lasted 3 years. 3 years of constant fighting, starvation, death. The Romans built siege towers, battering rams, tunnels. Carthage repelled them all. Roman soldiers said it was like fighting ghosts. The Carthaginians would emerge from hidden passages, attack, vanish. But slowly, the city was dying. Food ran out. People ate leather, boiled grass, anything to survive. Disease swept through the crowded streets, bodies piled in corners. But still, Carthage fought. In 147 BC, Rome sent a new commander, Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the Scipio who'd defeated Hannibal. This Scipio was different, methodical, patient. He tightened the siege, cut every supply route, built a wall around Carthage, no food in, no one out. The breach. Spring 146 BC, Scipio's soldiers found a weakness, a section of wall damaged by years of siege. They attacked at dawn. The wall broke. Romans poured through, into the harbor district. The Carthaginians fought in the streets, house by house, room by room. The Romans fought for 6 days. 6 days of urban warfare, every building a fortress, every street a battlefield. The Carthaginians used rooftops, threw tiles, furniture, anything. Roman soldiers said that even when Carthaginian men fell, the women picked up swords, fought until they couldn't. The final refuge. The survivors, maybe 50,000, fled to the Byrsa, the citadel, the highest hill where Dido had founded the city 900 years earlier. They barricaded themselves in the temple of Eshmun, Carthage's healing god, a place of sanctuary. Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian commander, came out alone, surrendered to Scipio, begged for mercy. But his wife didn't surrender. She stood on the temple steps with her 2 children. She looked down at her husband kneeling before the Romans. She shouted so everyone could hear, "You coward! You betray your city? Choose Roman chains over Carthaginian honor?" Then she took her children's hands, walked back into the burning temple. The flames consumed them. Witnesses said even the Roman soldiers were silent, moved by such courage, such pride. 17 days. Scipio ordered the city burned. His soldiers lit fires in every district. Carthage burned for 17 days. 17 days of continuous fire. The flames so bright they could be seen from ships 100 miles out to sea. The Romans pulled down the walls, the temples, the harbors, those magnificent circular harbors that had been engineering marvels. They plowed salt into the ground, a symbolic curse, that nothing would grow here, that Carthage would be forgotten. Of 600,000 people who'd lived in Carthage before the siege, 50,000 survived. They were sold into slavery, scattered across the Mediterranean. The city that had challenged Rome, that had terrified Rome, that had nearly destroyed Rome, was gone. Epilogue. What Rome couldn't destroy. The legacy. Rome thought they'd erased Carthage, but they couldn't erase the ideas. The Carthaginian system of trade networks? Rome adopted it, expanded it. The circular military harbor? Rome built them in every naval base. The agricultural techniques developed in Carthaginian North Africa? Rome's grain supply depended on them. Even Hannibal's tactics, particularly Cannae, became the foundation of Roman military doctrine. Every Roman general studied what Hannibal had done, tried to replicate it. Centuries later, the Romans built a new city on Carthage's ruins, called it Carthage. It became one of the greatest cities of the Roman Empire. Ironic, isn't it? The survivors. The Carthaginian people didn't disappear. They adapted, survived. The Berber populations of North Africa, the Numidians who'd been Carthage's allies and rivals, carried forward Carthaginian knowledge. The Phoenician language evolved, became Punic, survived in North Africa until the Arab conquests almost 1,000 years later. Carthaginian trade routes, those secret paths Hamilcar's navigators had guarded, became Roman trade routes, then Byzantine, then Arab. The knowledge passed down. In a way, Carthage never died, it just changed names. The question. Here's what keeps historians awake at night. What if Hannibal had marched on Rome after Cannae? What if the Carthaginian council had supported him fully, sent reinforcements, supplies, everything he needed? Could Carthage have won? Could Rome have fallen then? We'll never know. But consider this. Rome became an empire because of Carthage. The wars forced Rome to innovate, to expand, to become ruthless. Without Carthage as an enemy, would Rome have conquered the Mediterranean? The question itself shows Carthage's impact. The truth Rome buried. Rome wrote the histories. They called Carthaginians Punic, from Phoenician, and painted them as treacherous, cruel, barbaric. They said Carthaginians sacrificed children, burned them alive to their gods. Modern archaeology suggests this was propaganda. Roman lies to justify genocide. The truth? Carthage was a republic where citizens voted, where merchants became leaders through merit, where different cultures, Phoenician, Berber, Greek, Egyptian, lived and traded together. They built cities that lasted centuries, created art, philosophy, literature, all lost when Rome burned the libraries. We'll never know what wisdom died in those flames, what stories, what knowledge. Rome won the war, but they lost something too. Diversity of thought, competition, a rival that made them better. Outro, the lessons of Carthage. The story complete. From a fugitive queen with 80 ships to an empire that terrified Rome. From merchant princes to Hannibal's genius to a final stand that moved even their enemies. For 800 years, Carthage existed. For 800 years, it shaped the Mediterranean world. And then it was gone, erased in 17 days of fire. What Carthage teaches us. First, intelligence can defeat strength. Hannibal, with 50,000 men, crushed Rome's 86,000 at Cannae, not through power, through thinking. The lesson? In life, in business, in any competition, strategy beats size. Always. Second, resilience determines survival. Rome lost 70,000 men at Cannae and refused to quit. Carthage survived the mercenary revolt, the loss of Sicily, defeat after defeat. Both civilizations showed that refusing to surrender, that stubborn determination, matters more than any single victory or defeat. Third, adaptability is essential. Carthage built an empire on trade. When Rome forced war, they adapted, created armies, produced generals like Hannibal. The rigid die, the flexible survive. When the game changes, change with it. Fourth, unity is strength, division is death. Rome stayed united, even after Cannae. Carthage's wealthy families played politics while Hannibal fought in Italy. They denied him reinforcements. Recall, support. Internal division killed Carthage before Rome's legions touched the walls. In organizations, in teams, in nations, division is the true enemy. Fifth, legacy outlives empire. Carthage is dust, but Hannibal's tactics are studied in every military academy. Carthaginian harbors inspired Roman engineering. Their trade routes became the foundation of Mediterranean commerce. The question isn't whether you win or lose, it's what you leave behind. Ideas outlast armies. Innovation outlasts conquest. A final thought. The story of Carthage reminds me of something fundamental about human civilization. We compete, we fight, we destroy each other. But the knowledge, the ideas, they survive, they spread, they evolve. Rome tried to erase Carthage. They failed because you can burn cities, enslave people, salt the earth, but you can't kill an idea. You can't destroy the human drive to build, to create, to Turkish lira. Carthage lives in every innovation, every act of courage against impossible odds, every refusal to surrender when surrender seems logical. That's the real lesson. That's the story that matters. The empire is gone, the fires are cold, but the story remains. The story of a merchant city that became a superpower, of a general who nearly destroyed Rome, of a people who chose death over submission. Tonight, you've heard the truth, the story they tried to bury. If you found value in this journey through history, subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who loves history. Comment with your thoughts. What moment moved you most? What lesson will you carry forward? The night speaks, and tonight we spoke of Carthage, the eternal enemy, the eternal inspiration. Sleep well, and remember, Carthage fell, but its spirit, that's fucking eternal, my guy. Good night.
Subscribe if you wanna see us again. Oh, subscribe.